I have made the decision to present as far away from the left as almost humanly possible, because I cannot anymore take the insanity and the contradiction and the wokeness.
Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kyla, and today we are going to be discussing the alt-rightification of Young Dumb Honey Bun. I'm assuming if you clicked on this video, you already know who Young Dumb Honey Bun, or YDHB as she recently changed her channel name to, is. But if not, a brief rundown of who she is. Essentially, Young Dumb Honey Bun, or Sara is her actual name, is a content creator on YouTube who mainly got popular making compilation videos of another YouTuber called Amberlynn Reid, who, again, if you know Young Dumb Honey Bun, you know Amberlynn Reid. But if you don't, Amber is a YouTuber who is, I believe, over 500 pounds, or she was anyways, and she created content just about like her life and her day-to-day stuff, but there's a lot of controversy surrounding her and her relationships with people and like her lying to her audience, just a whole bunch of different stuff. And Young Dumb Honey Bun used to do compilation videos cropping together Amber's content, and then she shifted more into actually showing her face and like talking in the videos and doing more reactionary content and breaking it down from a psychological standpoint, because she does have a degree in psychology. So that was kind of her whole thing. I used to actually watch Young Dumb Honey Bun a lot, like back in the compilation days and in the more reaction style content to Amberlynn Reid. And I've just kind of always been interested in like Amberlynn and the whole Amberverse and all of that. So I used to actually really like her content, and I found I was actually agreeing with a lot of the takes that Young Dumb Honey Bun would make. And why I say I did used to watch her is because for the last probably year or so, there's been a shift in her content that I've noticed. There was kind of two key shifts to her content. One was shifting in her Amberlynn content, and then the other one was shifting kind of away from that to other things. So with the Amberlynn content, I found that she went from discussing actual problematic things that Amber was doing and saying, exposing lies, things like that, to honestly just nitpicking, which is kind of ironic because one of the things that Amber always says is that everyone who like makes reactionary style videos about her is just like a hater. They're just nitpicking everything she does. They find a problem with everything she does. And to be honest, while that's not always true, with Young Dumb Honey Bun's more recent content, it definitely held true, at least in my eyes. I feel like Sara, Young Dumb Honey Bun, would really nitpick every little thing that Amber was doing as kind of a last-ditch effort to sort of hang on to content that was doing well for her, because her Amberlynn videos did perform pretty much the best on her channel. So I think that it was an effort to kind of hang on to that, but there really wasn't much to talk about with Amber, so she would just pick on anything. I pretty much stopped watching Young Dumb Honey Bun around when Amberlynn Reid and her ex-girlfriend, now Becky, broke up. There was like a lot of drama surrounding that breakup, of course, as there always is with YouTubers who are public about their relationship. But after that whole breakup era of Amberlynn Reid, I noticed that Young Dumb Honey Bun, that was kind of like the end of there being things to talk about with Amberlynn, and so she was doing what seemed to me like a lot of unqualified diagnosing of Amberlynn, which yes, Sara is or was in school. I think she graduated, but I don't know if she's doing a master's or maybe she's done the master's. I don't really know. But I know she has a degree in psychology and a master's, or she's currently working towards the master's, and she would argue that that's why she was able to do that, like diagnose and talk from a more clinical standpoint. But honestly, to me, that doesn't really qualify you. Like, you're still not someone's therapist, even if you have a degree. And yes, it might add a little bit of extra knowledge to what you're saying, but also like an undergrad degree in psychology doesn't necessarily qualify you to diagnose someone over the internet. And also, I feel like with Sara's knowledge, she should know that you cannot accurately diagnose someone over a YouTube video. I'm not saying that this necessarily just applies to Amberlynn Reid, but YouTube in general is not a good, clear look at who someone is or what they do or what conditions they might deal with. It's very easy to manipulate or hide parts of yourself or only show good parts of yourself, not even intentionally, but just the way you act might be a little bit different on a video than it is when you're just in person, because talking to a camera, no matter how much you do it, is different. It's a little bit awkward, and you're clearly not actually talking to another person in the room. And with that, I also feel like it's very possible that in your darkest or most difficult times, which is typically when a psychological diagnosis would come into play, you're not necessarily going to think to record that, or you maybe don't want to, or whatever the case may be, but it's not on display. So I don't really feel like Amberlynn's videos are enough for anyone, I don't care how good of a psychologist you are, to diagnose. I found that Young Dumb Honey Bun was doing that a lot. She would constantly label Amberlynn a diagnosed narcissist, a narcissistic abuser, things like that. She would also nitpick and diagnose things that were just like completely foolish in my opinion, and this is where I really fell off. A good example of that was she was constantly criticizing and saying that Amberlynn was childhood regressing because she liked Legos, which like, there are Lego sets created for adults. Like, I don't know what you want me to tell you, and this is not a like in defense of Amberlynn Reid video. This is just like truly something that put me off of her videos, because I'm like, dude, do you think a 10-year-old can afford to or is able to complete a $500 Titanic Lego. Like, they just can't. It's not built for them. That is more for an older audience. Sure, the age range might say like 10 plus, but it doesn't mean that it's geared towards small children. So that was kind of like the first bit and sort of the main thing that put me off of her content, just because her Amberlynn Reid videos, which is why I watched her content to begin with, stopped being entertaining to me and I didn't find them interesting or useful. But then the next bit that really put me off of watching all of her content was when she shifted her content to what I consider to be a little bit more like anti-woke content on YouTube. A couple examples of these videos, which I have not watched and I don't really plan on it just because you can kind of get the gist from them right away. Although I watched a few of her earlier videos with the shift of this content and I just didn't enjoy it, but her more recent ones are Velma is a garbage can on fire, and there's other videos where she would be critiquing fat activists and things like that, and those were the videos that when she first started shifting her content I kind of started watching, but it just didn't, again, seem useful or entertaining or helpful to me at all, because in those videos she picks like a very extreme example and then like uses that extreme example to criticize an entire movement or to say like, oh my god, people are so stupid if they think this way, but it's like not very many people actually think that way. You're picking like the one extreme example that proves your point. But anyways, all of this led into her most recent video, which I did watch and will also be watching and reacting to here, which is called Why I'm Leaving the Left. And I have to say, honestly, I wasn't that surprised, just because her previous content about like Velma being a garbage can fire and like anti-fat activisms and like just all these type of videos. I feel like her videos have been heading this way for a while, taking examples of beliefs held only by a select few and then using it as a sweeping example of an entire movement. To me, that just, it wasn't very surprising to see a video like this. So now we're going to react to that video.
Tell me why I am so nervous making this video and why my heart is literally pounding uploading it. But for the first time, I feel like it is a necessary video. I think that I want to respect you enough to know where you stand and who you are watching, and I also want to respect myself enough to understand that this is a big part of me growing up. I am approaching 25, and I think that these are the values and morals that I have thought about, I have debated on, I have really came to understand through therapy and through self-reflection, and these are the values that I want to take into my marriage and take into my family life, and I think that it is very important. And so I think that for the first time, I am okay with the impending consequences of that and the way I'm going to receive backlash, and I'm okay with that. What I've decided to do is just have one comprehensive video where you can refer to it and then decide whether or not you would like to, going forward, listen to my opinions and stick around, or if you'd like to not do that. And as I said before, that this is a blessing for me to have been on this journey and to be able to have this platform, and regardless of if, you know, I have one person listening or 2 people or 5 people, I'm probably going to carry on with it in my free time, and I'm probably going to be much happier because I'm going to be able to talk about things that I find interesting and crucial with the morals that I want to carry on into, as I said, my life, my marriage, my adulthood. And I think that this whole process is going to make me feel a lot more free, and I value that beyond anything. And so if you would like to stick around and listen, then I really appreciate that. And I'm just going to talk about this as if you don't know me, as if this is the first time seeing my video, and I'm going to give you a little overview of everything I've been through. And I do think that it is unbelievably crucial to me, not only because of the reasons, as I said, you know, it's going to make me feel like I can express myself a lot clearer and more eloquent, and really, which I think, what a blessing to have in a Western country, right? And so if you are interested, here's a little story beginning to right now of how I grew up very left-leaning, not understanding anything about politics and not particularly being involved in politics at all, to now at 25 still not being involved in politics, still not associating myself with one particular group. However, I have made the decision to present as far away from the left as almost humanly possible, because I cannot anymore take the insanity and the contradiction and the wokeness anymore. So if this is the first time of you seeing me, hi, my name is Sara and I am originally from Poland. I have moved here in, I believe, about 2009 when I was still very young, and I have always grown up very removed from politics. My family never really spoke about politics. I was not not ever involved in these discussions, and so to this day I have no idea what my parents identify as in terms of politics and what kinds of things they vote for. So I am pretty okay with saying that I was never influenced from a young age to be anything when it comes to which political side I am on. My parents were always very encouraging of me to find out things by myself and read a lot and be inquisitive, and I think that's why they inspired me to be the person I am today, in terms of, you know, constantly wanting to learn, constantly going further, constantly doing something more, and I think that's absolutely great. So I'm pretty confident in saying that I remember nothing about any kind of political leaning from my youth. However, when I came here in 2009, I started realizing that there is people who have a certain identity and they rely very heavily on that. It's a big part of their identity. And I think that a lot of people are very passionate about the things that they do. When I was 16 or 17, I went to do my A-levels. And for those of you who don't know, that's like, you know, obviously high school education, I think. And I took sociology for 2 years and psychology for 2 years. That's when my journey began, and I think one of the most influential classes there was sociology. I loved it. I never ended up doing anything with it because I couldn't see myself kind of, you know, progressing in the field, but I was very good at it. I think that was the only thing that I was good at, as well as being passionate about, and I loved the discussions that we had because it was such a safe space with so many different people. I mean, there was one dude in our class who I remember told me to repent because I was holding hands with my boyfriend at the time in the corridor, and even he was allowed to speak clearly and respectfully, even though there was such a huge divide, and everyone thought he was a little bit crazy because he had such deep religious roots, and, you know, he was almost like rude at sometimes, but he still was able to speak freely without being harassed or belittled or anything like that, even though he could offend people and he could make people feel uncomfortable. But I really valued that in that class.
Okay, I'm going to pause there really quick just to touch on a little bit of what she said. This video is very long, so we're going to have to pause a few times. But one thing I do appreciate, I'll start off on a good note, a more positive note, is that I actually do appreciate her coming forward and just saying, like, you know, I want to make this video to be clear about my beliefs, and if you want to support me or not, I want you to have the information you need to make that decision. Which I don't think anyone like owes you their political views if you're just making YouTube videos that are unrelated to it. So it does feel a bit unnecessary and a bit like, I don't want to say self-centered, but I guess kind of self-centered to think that like this matters to people who her videos have never had to do with this before. Also, it's interesting that she said that she still doesn't really align one side or the other, but at the same time she wants to be as far away from the left as humanly possible. Those are her own words, which to me, the opposite of the left is the right, which means if you are as far away from the left as possible, you are extremely right-wing. So it's just kind of interesting, the contradictions, and of course, like, she's blaming the wokeness and the contradictories and stuff as if there aren't conservatives who are upset over how sexual an M&M presents.
The green M&M, you will notice, is no longer wearing sexy boots. Now she's wearing sensible sneakers. Leading women to wear frumpy shoes. The frumpier the better. That's the rule. M&Ms will not be satisfied until every last cartoon character is deeply unappealing and totally androgynous. Until the moment you wouldn't want to have a drink with any one of them. That's the goal. When you're totally turned off, we've achieved equity. They've won.
And then the last thing she was saying is that this guy who was offensive in her sociology class was able to talk about things and be quite offensive without being harassed. And it's interesting to me that she says that if people were to dislike what he was saying and to argue it or whatever, that he would have been harassed. But you could flip that to what she does with her videos, where she's taking something that someone says that she doesn't agree with and she's ripping it apart. She did that to Amber Lynn for years. And yet that's not harassment, that's valid criticism. But we'll keep watching because this video is extremely long, so yeah, I'll just keep playing that now.
As soon as you left that classroom, you left all of your feelings behind. And you had almost like a total reset. And I really valued that. I liked that we could speak and we could tell our, you know, teachers and colleagues like different opinions that we had, different perspectives, and I think that was great. And I remember one of the discussions was between me and a couple of other friends and the teacher, and she was basically proposing, like, why wouldn't you want to live in a capitalist like society? Like, why wouldn't you want to you know, have everyone be equal? And I remember thinking, that is so crazy. I remember thinking, how could you ever hear about this and even consider it? Because coming from someone whose mum still remembers what communism was like in Poland, to come into someone who has never experienced it and has just learned about it, and is like, why wouldn't you want that? That's so great. I couldn't fathom it. It couldn't fit into my brain that someone just suggested that a neurosurgeon and a cleaner, or a neurosurgeon and a mechanic, could be paid the same and be compensated the same for the jobs that was so completely different. It was so insane to me. I have never met anyone from my country, or even I have Ukrainian friends, can say that the parents or the family or anyone remembers communism in a favorable light. I have never met, and again, coming from my grandparents, my parents, their parents, the cousins, the uncles, no one ever sits down and thinks that was a good time in our life, that was a great time for our country. No one. And so it was so crazy for me to hear that. And so I started growing up, I started maturing, and I started looking at the people around me and realizing that a lot of people are self-censoring. A lot of people are not saying the things that they really feel when they are in the friend group, because they're scared that the friend group's going to turn on them. And that was the first time where I was like, this is a little bit weird. I didn't realize that there was like a right opinion. I thought that we could just all get along. And I have had my entire life had friends who were very conservative, and I had friends who were very, very liberal, or that they were Tories and Labour, I believe, and they were all friends together. And I had people who openly were like, oh yes, so basically my dad's really rich, and we are a Tory family, so we're gonna vote for whoever benefits us. And my Labour friends were like, that's great, I am not from a rich family and I don't hold the same values and beliefs as you, but you're still my friend, even though I'm going to vote completely different. And I thought that was normal. I thought that everyone's going to just get on and get along, even though they have different opinions. I didn't realise that that was such a big divisive factor in a lot of people's lives. I didn't realise that, because I was always around people who spoke freely and openly about the beliefs, and no one was at each other's throats. So I went to university, I met my best friend, and I am so happy that I did. The reason is because she is a little bit older than me, and I am so forever grateful for the sped up development that I experienced whilst being friends with her. She could get my brain going like no one else could. She was constantly challenging my perspectives, bringing in very important conversations that I'd never thought about before. She had a great way of talking, debating, and making you question what you think and question what you believe. And it's a great thing. It's such a valuable characteristic to have in my friends, and I really love that. I love having friends of different opinions, because we can share these things and we can talk about it, and we can say, why do you think that? Is there a reason for this? Like, what makes you this kind of person? What makes you that? And I just love that. I love having that kind of circle of friends. When I went to do my first undergraduate degree, which is my degree in psychology, I graduated with honours, and this is where kind of my career began in psychology. I was taught a lot of things, and this isn't a while ago. This is like 2019 that I graduated. I was taught things that now are considered problematic or even bigoted. So let's take, for example, gender dysphoria. I was taught that this is a mental disorder in which the body and the brain essentially feel like they shouldn't be going together. A person's feeling dysphoric, they're feeling a variety of very, very negative emotions, anxiousness, insecurity, a lot of negative emotions specifically towards their body, and that, I was taught, needs to be addressed with intensive therapy and working out and prioritizing this person's health, mental health and physical health, and putting forward a plan as to what this person needs, whether that be medical transition or whether that be intensive therapy. That's what I was taught. But now, apparently that makes you a medicalist and a bigot, because you deny people who identify as trans to simply go in and have surgeries and have transition without prior diagnosis. Again, I didn't understand that. I don't understand why, if someone comes over to you and says, hey, can I please have, for example, clozapine, you don't just give it to them. You don't say, okay, if that's going to make you happy. You say, why do you need antipsychotics? What's happening? Well, I'm experiencing disassociation, I'm experiencing voices, I'm experiencing intense 2 or more sensational hallucinations. Okay, well, first of all, we need to refer you. We need to refer you to a psychiatrist. We need to refer you to a medical professional in order for that to be diagnosed, to ensure the best treatment. Not treatment first, and then maybe a diagnosis later, or not even a diagnosis. I have never been taught. I don't understand why that is. If someone comes over to you and says that they need an insulin pen, you ask them, why is that? and then you run the correct tests in order to diagnose the problem first, and then treat them in order to make them the best version of themselves, the healthiest and the most happy. And I don't understand why now that is such a big controversial issue. Let's take another thing. In my second degree, in my master's in clinical neuropsychiatry, I was taught to never simply medicate a patient, to never simply start treatment of pharmaceuticals before intensive therapy hasn't been carried out for months at least, or before a specific diagnosis was not given, where treatment needed to be sped up. I was always taught, and this is one of the most important quotes I will carry with me, that your patients are not lab rats, that you do not give patients drugs and then see what happens, that you always have to identify the issue and identify the source of the issue, because that's why someone comes over to a psychiatrist or a psychologist in the first place. They have something that they want to talk about, whether that be anxiety and stress, whether that be something deeper. And as a clinician, you are supposed to listen to that person, prioritize the health, and then prescribe the treatment needed, never the other way around. And so to see young people now who in a lot of these cases have not been educated to any kind of degree about this, who have maybe taken gender studies, saying things like, you shouldn't want to fix disability, you shouldn't want to treat disability, you shouldn't want to diagnose gender dysphoria, that is a bigoted term and we shouldn't do this, puts me at a crisis internally, because I have gotten, at this point, 5 years of education, or 6 years of education. If you count my A-levels, where this is the first time it was brought up, then that's your 3 years of undergraduate, a master's, and then 2 years of your A-levels. So that's 6 years of education where I was taught that you prioritize the patient, you prioritize the health, and you give them a correct diagnosis. That now a 20-year-old is telling me that's not how it is, or a 16-year-old is telling me, well, then that's bigoted and it makes you this kind of person. And it put me at this very unpleasant place where I'm like, am I listening to the individuals that have been educated, that are clinicians that are working for example, the NHS, and they are the best of the best, where they come in once a week and they teach you to, at a big lecture hall where there's hundreds of people and they teach you all of these things? Or do I listen to someone on TikTok? What is happening? Because if you dare to question it, you cannot have debates with.
Okay, we're gonna pause there again. My face kind of says it all, but the fact that this super educated woman is saying, do I listen to the educated, best of the best people who work in psychology and whatever, or do I listen to the 16-year-old on TikTok? If the opinion of a 16-year-old on TikTok matters that much to you at 25, that is a you issue. And that has nothing to do with being left or right. It's more so just, why would that impact what you've learned and gone to school to know? Why does it bother you so much if a 16-year-old is wrong on TikTok? Like, that shouldn't matter. They're 16, they're in high school. I find that really interesting. You don't need 6 years of school to tell you that you don't need to listen to everything on TikTok. In fact, probably half or more of what is on TikTok is incorrect, or people just saying things to get views. It seems like she's conflating the opinions of a few chronically online takes with that of like a larger percent of people, which I don't really care if you're left-leaning or right-leaning. You shouldn't just believe everything that people say on TikTok, whether you like what they're saying, whether you disagree with it. Like, you just shouldn't believe it, especially not if you are educated in that field. Why would the opinion of a 16-year-old telling you that your education is wrong even faze you at all? And she said it puts her in a crisis, and it puts her in this very upset position where she has to decide whether to listen to her education or to 16 to 20-year-olds online on TikTok. She touched on a little bit of other stuff too. She thought that everyone would always get along, and she didn't realize that politics could be like a divisive thing. And it's interesting to me that she says that, because she's picking an example that, again, just really suits her narrative. But a lot of times the reasons why politics gets in the way of friendships is because, for example, I would find it very difficult to be friends with someone who was actively voting against women's rights to their own bodies, or gay people being able to be married. Like, it would be difficult to be friends with someone who actively believes in things that harm you. So I feel like she wouldn't really recognize that in her video because it doesn't suit her narrative. So for her to kind of say, oh, well, I thought that people could just have different opinions. They can have different opinions. I don't like pickles. A lot of my friends love them. That's a difference of opinion. But when it comes down to like rights and people actually having their rights taken away from the party that you're choosing to vote for, it's understandable that your friend may not want to be as close with you knowing that. Yeah, we'll continue watching.
People anymore either. I'm seeing this thing where even asking questions means that you are against them. You see this in so many cases where simply asking someone, what about the alternative? Why don't we do this? Makes you an enemy, and like immediately means that you are against them. So my question is, how do we progress as humans? How do we find new ways of doing things? How do we evolve if we are not allowed to ask questions? And what happens when someone thinks differently than the entire friend group but doesn't dare say anything because it goes against the common narrative that is popular at the time and starts self-censoring? That child becomes an adult that starts self-censoring, and then you have an entire generation of people who are too scared to speak, and they are too scared to say what they want to say because we are not allowed to have debates anymore. And that goes for both sides. Why can't we talk about things? Why is it like you are the enemy? No, you're the enemy. You're this kind of bigoted word and this kind of, and it's so crazy that it's put me at a point where I started, and this is where it started, I would say this is probably 1 or 2 years ago, where it started making me question things. And if you go back, if you know me, a lot of people that do know me I am very embarrassed for because I was a man-hating feminist, and I am so embarrassed about it, but at the same time I think it's time that I take ownership of it and say, you know what, yeah, and I've grown from that, and I'm stepping into adulthood with new ideas. I was the first one to be like, men like have oppressed women for so long, and that everything that's wrong with the world, and white cis het men are just like the spawn of Satan. Like, it's so embarrassing. I look back now at a college argument that I had with someone talking about the pay gap, talking about the gender pay gap, and this dude was like, listen to yourself. And he was talking to me, he was citing evidence, and I was so determined to just not listen to any of it, to be like, no, I don't care, this is what happens, this is what it is, having no idea, no evidence, nothing to back it up with. But I was convinced that I was right, and I was convinced that he was wrong. And I cringe because it got to a point where no one else had to tell me that, but I had to stand there and say, okay, you say things like, you hate all men. Do you hate your father? No, God no, he's the most hard-working, loving man I've ever known. Do you hate your brothers? Do you hate your fiancé? Do you hate your male friends? Well, no. So how can you say that? And I know that this is maybe like a little example, but it starts at the roots. How can you say that? How can you say such a generalized thing? Are you oppressed right now? Well, it depends what you mean. Well, have you ever felt oppressed? Well, no. Have you ever been denied opportunities because you're a woman? No. Have you ever been denied opportunities because you are an immigrant and a woman? Well, no.
This seems so obvious, but just because it hasn't happened to you doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And feminism and all the stuff that she's talking about, I used to be a man-hating feminist. Feminism is literally about caring for other women, not just yourself and what suits you, but it's recognizing the struggle as a whole and all the issues that women across the world face. So maybe where you live, it's not an issue, but other places it is. Very basic knowledge, but if she wants to say, well, do you feel oppressed? No. Okay, so that doesn't mean that no women are.
I've actually become exactly who I want to be, and I have been granted so many more opportunities because I was a woman and because I am an immigrant. And so, what are you talking about right now? We're not talking about globally, we're talking about right now in your everyday life. What is it that supports your logic of I hate all men, they are the evil of the society, I am oppressed because I am a woman and I have been denied all of these opportunities, when you yourself can admit that in your life that has not directly disadvantaged you? How dare you say that? And I felt so terrible about it.
I'm going to pause there again really quick, just to touch on what she was saying there. Now, first of all, I am someone who sometimes says I hate all men. Obviously, I don't mean I hate all men. I've got guy friends. I have a boyfriend who I love very much. I don't actually hate all men. But in my opinion, whenever a woman says that, any good guy is just kind of like, yeah, I get it. Because unfortunately, a lot of the times, for example, violent crimes against women are mainly committed by men. So she said, what are you talking about right now? I'm not talking globally, but I'm talking about in your life. But like, why are we not talking globally? Like, she's making her views a very self-centered, which is fine, I guess, but you don't have to be directly impacted by an issue to care about it. There's tons of issues that I am not directly impacted by, thankfully, and I'm very blessed to say that I still care about and want better for other people. And for me personally, like, I'm a feminist because I want all women in all countries to have equal rights and to be treated fairly and have rights to their bodies and rights to work if they want to, or to vote, or to be treated as their own person, and rights to proper healthcare, equal pay, just all of these different things. And when she's saying that these people who say they hate all men, like, oh, well, do you hate your dad? Do you hate your brother? Do you hate your friends? All this stuff. When people say they hate all men, I would say majority of people don't mean they hate literally every single man to ever exist, but it's more of a general statement because generally speaking, a lot of violent crimes against women are committed by men. Men, a lot of the time, mistreat women, or their abusers are men. Like, there's a reason why women say that. It's not just like, oh, whatever, I hate men, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's because of what goes on in this world, unfortunately. And of course, that is not all men, but any good man knows that he's not the target of that when a woman says that. That's just my opinion. I feel like if a guy, to me, it's kind of a red flag if a woman says, oh, I hate men. And if a guy gets really butthurt or irritated by that, he's honestly kind of giving red flags. So again, all of this just to say, it feels like her views are very, very self-centered. Everything is just like about her. It's like if it doesn't directly impact her, she doesn't need to care about it, and it makes her not want to care about it, I guess, because where she said she wants to be as far away from the left as possible, I guess she associates feminism only with the left. And so for her, she wants to be far away from feminism because she doesn't actually hate all men and she loves her dad and her fiance and her brothers or whatever. But again, that's just a very me-centric way to make your views. And I've noticed that as like a running theme throughout this whole thing, that everything that she doesn't like or doesn't want to associate with anymore is very self-serving, and if it doesn't apply directly to her, then it's a non-issue. And we're gonna keep watching, but I do want to read this comment that I just saw here really quickly in regards to specifically what Sarah was just talking about. So this commenter, I'll pop it up here. I have the name crossed out just in case they don't want to be associated with the YouTube video. It says, you do know women in many countries don't have rights, can't own their property, get killed publicly for bringing shame to their families. In the US, women are having their reproductive rights taken away. Just because you haven't experienced discrimination because you're a woman, it doesn't mean it's not an issue for so many millions of others. How utterly self-serving can you be? I am so disappointed. Which, exactly, I feel like she put into words perfectly what I was just trying to describe, that just because it's not a you issue doesn't mean it's not an issue at all. But we will continue watching the video because there's still quite a bit left.
And I sat there thinking about these things, reading books and, watching videos and thinking about this and questioning what I've been saying all this time. And I thought, I can't defend this. You're right. Me. I can't defend this. I can't say stuff like that because it's not true. Because if someone was to ask me about these things in a normal environment, in a sit-down debate, and say, can you prove these to me? I couldn't. And I felt ashamed. So I stopped saying it. Because it's not true. I don't hate men. I don't feel oppressed. And that's not to say I've never been a victim of crimes committed, especially by men. And I think a lot of you, especially women, will know exactly, unfortunately, what I'm talking about.
Okay, that right there, the fact that she's saying, it's not to say that I have not been affected by crimes done by men against women, and unfortunately a lot of you, especially women, will know what I mean. That right there is why we need feminism. There's a reason why women will know exactly what you mean. She just proved her own point by saying that. Insane. So close to the point. She was so close to the point.
That's not to say that, because I have. And as unfortunate as it is, that doesn't mean that all men are terrible. That means that that one man was terrible. And to think about the things I was saying, that the menace of society, who keeps it running? My dad gets up at 4 a.m. to go to work, even though he has been retired for years and he doesn't need to work. But he wants to because he finds a passion in his work and he thinks he's, giving something back to the world by doing that and fixing things and, helping his family. He feels useful. He keeps the world running, and so do a lot of men. What about the men that are fighting in wars and things like that? Do you hate them too? And I was so embarrassed because it's like, how can you say stuff like that?
I feel like women and men keep the world running equally, but it's just frustrating to hear her say that as if there are jobs that men can do that women cannot do, when in every field, even male-dominated fields, there are still women working it. To imply that men keep the world running, there's a reason. Women were not allowed to be in power. And for her also to cite, like, well, what about the men fighting in wars? I'm not saying I don't respect that, I do. But I honestly feel like if more women historically were in power, there probably would be less wars for those men to have to fight in. So, I don't know, that's just my 2 cents. It's just so crazy to hear her basically sound so anti-woman, and to imply that like men are like the backbone of society. And I'm not saying they're not. I don't think that any gender is the backbone of society. I think that we all function well together, and I think that there are people with strengths and weaknesses. It's not based on if you're a woman or if you're a man what you can do. Which again, this is a reason why we need feminism, because a lot of women are told that they can't do certain things. But anyways,
when you can't actually defend it. And so I've stopped saying that because I can't subscribe to this kind of idea. As I've said before, I don't feel like I have been denied all of these things. And again, I'm not talking about globally, because I do recognize that there's these global, cases and global instances that we need to speak about and we need to talk about. But again, I think that everyone is now in this binary, as ironic as that is. Everyone is now saying, well, if you don't believe that you are actively being oppressed, then you are denying that oppression exists. No, that's not true. I can say I am not oppressed and I don't feel it. I don't feel that me just being a woman and existing as a woman is a threat to my existence. However, I can recognize that that can be different to other people.
Again, sorry to pause so quick, but even this, it's interesting for her to point out that she feels like people exist in this binary where if she admits that she's not oppressed, that means she's denying oppression exists elsewhere and that she's not talking about globally. But how you align yourself does matter on a bigger scale than just you, and I think that that's what she's failing to realize, and that's why a lot of people have this viewpoint of, oh well, you're basically denying that oppression exists at all. She's saying that she doesn't feel that way and that she's not denying it, but her views only align with what serves her. And if you're recognizing that that oppression exists elsewhere, why would you not want to align yourself with caring about that?
I can recognize that not all men are absolutely terrible, but I can recognize that there's a huge issue that is fundamental in some things that we do or say or whatever that may be. And I am more than willing to have these conversations. I think they are so important to have. I think they aid society and us evolving, but you're not allowed to have those, because as soon as you say, well, I don't feel... someone was going to jump in and say, well, I had breakfast this morning, so world hunger doesn't exist, and they shut you down. And that's not the case. You can say one thing while also recognizing another. They can be true at the same time. And so, no, I don't particularly feel like right now I am being denied opportunities simply because I exist as a woman. I also don't subscribe to this idea of saying that to other women. I don't think that we should sit there and say things like, just because you are a woman, then you are going to be capped because of the glass ceiling. You're never going to get to the top. All men are going to hate you and use you. I think that is such terrible advice, and I could never imagine looking at my daughter telling her men are your enemy, whites. I could never imagine giving her a phone where someone on the internet is going to tell her that, and they are going to tell her that. I can never imagine saying to my daughter, because you are a woman who is white, you are in some way guilty of something that has happened hundreds of years ago on a different continent to you. You are the issue. I could never imagine them saying that to my daughter, to someone on the phone. I think that is insane. And I can never imagine talking to someone else's child.
Okay, so I'm guessing there she was talking about racism and saying that if she had a child, she couldn't imagine telling them that because she's white, that she's guilty for something that happened hundreds of years ago on a different continent than you. And I find that really interesting because she's saying on a different continent, but racism exists everywhere, including in Europe, even to this day. Not only that, I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at, I'm laughing because I just find it so mind-blowing that someone could even think this and be this uneducated. But also for her to say, so on a different continent, which no, it's happened on every continent, but also to say hundreds of years ago, racism is current events. This is still happening. And even parts of it that we learned about in history wasn't that long ago, unfortunately. There was still segregation in the 50s. That's not even 100 years ago. I find a lot of people do this where they try to make racism and things like that sound like this years and years ago issue that we aren't currently responsible for, but it's still happening. So we will keep watching, but I just had to point that one out.
Saying because your skin color is different to mine, you are forever going to be the victim. You'll never achieve the same as my daughter whose skin color is white. That is so evil. How can you say that?
How can you say that? Who's saying that?
How can you then go on and say that you want to fix things by telling people that they are victims? I have recently read a study that talked about victimhood and the way we seek victimhood. Essentially, it was women who were putting scars on the face to go to a job interview, and just before they left, the person who was organising the study said, let me just touch it up real quick, and it actually removed the scar, but the person didn't know, so they thought they were going into a job interview with a huge scar on the face, but there was nothing there. And they said, hey, let me know at the end of this interview if you feel like you were being discriminated against, if you feel like the interviewer was talking about the scar on your face, if you feel like they were actually making suggestions or comments, invertly on your appearance. Do you feel like you were discriminated against with this pretend scar that wasn't actually there? And they came back and said, yes, I was discriminated against, which to me tells me that if you tell people that they are a victim, they will be discriminated against, they will look for that victimhood. They will look for that discrimination where there may be nothing there. And I think that distracts us from the real, very important conversations about equality and inclusivity that we need to have. I don't understand what the actual point of that is. Why would you tell that to someone? Why would you tell a child that they never amount to anything because of someone else? And then send them into the world with this idea that everyone that looks a certain way is the enemy, is the oppressor, or at one point has been, so doesn't deserve respect, or they need to be wary about that person. I am washing my hands of that ideology. I will not be one to continue that. And I think I finally got to a point where this internal feeling of, oh my god, people around me must think that I'm crazy. I must be crazy. Like, I am thinking different to everyone around me. This feeling is suddenly overshadowed by this other big feeling that's telling me, you need to speak your mind while you still have an opportunity to speak your mind, while you are lucky enough to be in a Western country, to be born in a Western country where you are freely able to express yourself and you have that freedom of speech. And you have to tell people that you think that this may not be the way forward. You are able to use this big platform, even if you reach one other person or two other people that never knew you existed before, and to tell them it's okay to have different opinions. It's okay to debate. It's okay to share those opinions. And it's okay to understand other people's views. And that goes both ways. Again, I have never signed a particular, ideological view. I've never said that I am on this side or this side. I have always said that I'm kind of in the middle, but I was definitely left-leaning, and if anything came out of my mouth in a political debate or a discussion, it would be something that a leftist would say.
Once again, very interesting to say that you're more in the center and you're not associating with either side, but also in the same video saying you want to be as far away from the left as humanly possible. I don't know if she just forgot that she said that, but she said that 20 minutes ago. And again, I find it really interesting her saying that basically she wants to let people know it's okay to have different opinions, but to be honest, I don't feel like conservatives are very okay with that either.
And so maybe, if anything, I was really on the left and I just didn't realize because I wasn't doing it overtly. So maybe that's what it was. But right now, I'm seeing people saying things like young children, if they are expressing hobbies and show interest in the opposite gender, they are trans. And it is shocking and upsetting and incredibly heartbreaking to see grown adults pushing some children and not actually listening and prioritizing their health and their well-being, but prioritizing either their fame because they want to get on TV or write books about it or go around the world and tour, whatever that may be, or just their own ideology, and they want to be like, look at me, look, I have one of these rare Pokemons that everyone's talking about right now. That's how it feels. And instead of sending them to therapy and understanding and dealing with it, they are starting to say things like children should be transitioning at a very young age, below 18. And to me, in my gut, in my heart, that's whoa, slow down. You just need a second to breathe. Tell me why. Show me the evidence. But if you just question it, then you are called something.
I don't think any normal person is saying that, though. The example she's giving, which one, no proof, no evidence of any of that actually happening. But again, she's taking views and blanketing them on an entire political side. When those views are held by probably 1-2% of that entire group.
And I also have this strong feeling of, I don't think this is right when the most inclusive, inclusive community is pushing someone out of the way because they stand in the way of the narrative. So for example, let's take any community. If you take, for example, the left-leaning fat positivity community, the fat acceptance community, as soon as a fat person loses weight and says, actually, I wasn't happy, something that goes directly against the narrative, they say, you have no voice here. And they are shunned. And I've even talked about in videos before where they say things like, ex-fat people are so annoying, and they talk. So you don't actually mean it. You don't mean you are super inclusive and you want to hear everyone's opinion. You only want to hear the opinion of people who agree with you and your cause. Because as soon as that fat person no longer supports your narrative and says the same things as you and actually dares to say something different, you shun them. Recently, there's been this big push against people who have detransitioned, who are saying, hey, actually, even though I was, saying the same things that you were saying, now I've gone through it, now I've had this lived experience, and I don't believe the things that you are saying and pushing for, and they are completely shunned. They are either harassed, they are made fun of. And so again, this very inclusive community who are saying things like, listen to trans people, and not listening to trans people who have said, hey, I don't agree with you. they are now the enemy. How does that work? I cannot personally, I couldn't defend that argument. I don't know how do you defend that? How did you say it? Do you say, well, I shun them because I don't like them, I shun them because they have a different opinion than me? How do you actually genuinely reason that decision to say to them, you are no longer part of the community? Why not? Why does that happen?
Okay, gonna pause there really quick again. But what she's talking about with like ex-fat positivity members and like detransitioners and stuff, the unfortunate reality is a lot of the people who do and say these things come out being super, super conservative, and they use that as leverage or almost like anti-trans propaganda, for lack of anything else to call it. And that's not me saying that like no one's ever detransitioned or anything like that out of like genuine just wanting to do that. I truly don't think that, but I've seen tons of videos of people on YouTube talking about their detransition experience without saying that they should not have been allowed to transition in the first place or things like that. And also, like, to touch on kind of what she's saying there, what she's talking about is very like Fox News, extremist, propaganda-y type information, when I don't let extreme cases on either side determine my opinion. There are tons of people who would be like extreme left that I do not agree with at all. I'm still considering myself more on the left. I mean, I'm Canadian, so it's not like the American left, but still, I consider myself more left-leaning. I definitely agree with a lot more of what's there. Do I agree with every single thing? No, probably not. Do I even know every single thing that they stand for? Definitely not. But the same could be said for the conservative side. I'm sure if I really looked into all the policies, there would be some things on the conservative side that I would agree with. But that being said, the vast majority of it, I don't. I just can't get behind it. So it seems like that's kind of what Sara is doing. She's basically saying this one extreme case of someone shunning someone for being fat positivity, which I didn't even know the fat positivity movement had anything to do with politics, but I guess it does. She's letting that kind of control what she thinks of the entire side. And her language is very interesting because I find that she wants to be free to have any opinion, but if someone chooses not to entertain an opposing opinion, they're shunning them, which is a really dramatic thing to me. I would say if you want to debate politics, like sign up for a debate. You can't force people to want to have a conversation with you. And she acts like people have to be open to conversation, but that's just unfortunately not the real world. Some people are like, you know what, if you don't agree with me, I don't want to talk to you, and they can do that. That's their right.
Another thing is that I've seen this video the other day, and I think that this was the video that finally pushed me to make this one. I am pro-choice. I will always be pro-choice. I believe that you should have a right to a healthy and safe abortion. I do believe that, and I always will, because I know that there's so many different circumstances. I think that that should be coupled with early and really good quality sex education so that we can prevent unnecessary or unwanted pregnancy, so that we don't have to perform these abortions. However, I do think that education and preventative measures should go hand in hand before abortion is the last resort of because it has a big impact on an individual. But I will always be pro-choice. I will always understand that women have to have control over their bodies, and I do believe that. Why am I now seeing people who are so pro-choice that I actually would rather step away from them? I have seen this video of this woman who says that if she ever has an abortion, she's gonna have a party of aborted fetuses and aborted fetus themed party, and they're gonna have joy in that. They're gonna be so happy about it.
Straight up though, if I ever have to have an abortion, you bet I'm gonna have a fucking party. I'm gonna have cupcakes with aborted fetuses drawn on them, lots of snacks, I'm gonna come up with some sort of cocktail and call it the aborted fetus, and me and all of my friends are just gonna hang out, eat a bunch of yummy dead fetus.
I may be pro-choice, but that is borderline psychotic. There is being pro-choice and understanding the gravity of the situation you're talking about. So I don't want to be associated with people like that. I don't want to have people say, well, this person's pro-choice and you're pro-choice, so you're in the same group. No, I will always be pro-choice, but I can recognize unhinged behavior when I see it.
Okay, but again, that's a very extreme example that does not reflect most pro-choice people, nor the whole left-leaning political side. And she acts like because she doesn't want to be associated with this one person with a very extreme view on TikTok that now she has to jump from the left and go to the opposite side and be, I guess, more conservative, which doesn't really make any sense to me. And also the flip side of that, I would say, is she's picking, again, these very specific examples of people who would be left-leaning, very extreme examples, and saying, I don't want to be associated with that. But if you look at the flip side, you can find tons and tons of different clips of people who are conservative saying the most outlandish, ridiculous things, debating why an M&M is no longer sexy or how wrong it is that another one's a lesbian. And it's like, you want to be associated with that then? Like, is that kind of what you're saying? Because that's what I'm getting from this.
I also see this constant demonization of women who don't want to work. I see this demonization of the 9 to 5 because it's a rat race, because it's so gross. How could you want that? I see people attacking women who are stay-at-home mums who choose to have children, who want to be a traditional woman where she doesn't want to work, she just wants to have babies. And now suddenly that's a problem too. They'll tell you if you are losing weight, you are a racist. If you are not losing weight, then you are a racist. If you are finding big bodies attractive, then that's fetishizing. If you are not, then you are fatphobic. If you want to have control over who you are having sex with, then that's whatever ism that is because someone else thinks that you should be attracted to them. And I'm seeing people who are saying my community or people who think like me are better because we are more inclusive and you can feel safe with us and we are all these nice things and, you know, we accept people. And then the people who either question what they're saying or have a different opinion are being doxxed, being harassed, being threatened. And I personally cannot sit there and be like, yeah, that's the same community I belong to. That's the same political views I have. So I do believe that I'm right in the middle. I agree with some things and I am very much either still considering or educating myself on others or simply just not agreeing with that. Because I think that there needs to be a limit, and I think it's going to be such a refreshing thing for me to finally be able to say, actually, no, I don't agree with this. And for those people who want to stay and listen, and for those who are like, no, I can't deal with that, for them to find their own people and for them to find their own community. And if they just want to listen to people who repeat the same, 5 sentences or 5 arguments over and over again, then that's not going to be here. Because here I want to challenge my own and everyone else's perspectives, and I want to, think out loud, and I want to have discussions without feeling like there is a script I need to follow. And if I don't follow it, then I'm going to get doxxed, I'm going to get harassed, I'm going to be called all these names. My employers are going to be called by the most accepting community that there is. And I think one of the major things is, as I'm growing up and actually considering having children or adopting children, because guys, that actually having my own biological children is something that I'm not super on board with. I've talked about it. I said more than likely probably not for me. That may change, but more than likely probably not for me. However, adoption or fostering is something that I would consider, and I would love to do that at one point in my life. However, I cannot publicly say things are acceptable that in my mind, in my head, and in my heart, I would feel terrible if I sent my child to school, either doing or accepting. For example, we talked about the trans teacher who was, teaching students with huge prosthetic fetish gear on, and people were expecting me to say, this is who they are, let them do that. I would not send my child to a school like that. I would fear for their safety. I would fear for the professionalism of that school. I would fear for simple safety in terms of this is not safe to have around electrical equipment, like that wig is going to catch on fire. This is not school uniform, whatever that may be. Like those kinds of things. I can't tell you things that I don't believe. I can't tell you things that I question in my head and then spew things that I don't agree with. That's not right. That is so disrespectful both to me and to you. So I'm not going to do that anymore.
Okay. Again, a quick pause, but that whole teacher thing was essentially a hoax. They presented male literally every other time except for in the school. They were trying to make it look like this is what all trans people want and this is what they want to be allowed in schools. I don't think any single person thinks that was appropriate or should be done, but it's literally nothing to do with the left. So I feel like if she did a little bit of research, she could have found that out because it was all over the internet, all over Twitter, everything. Very accessible to see that was basically fake news, for again lack of anything better to call it. But it's just insane. It was anti-trans. It was people trying to use that as fuel to suit their narrative and their arguments. And I feel like even this whole thing, someone else made another really good comment that I want to read here. Where is it? So someone else commented something kind of like what I was getting into with her being like anti-wokeness and all this. I haven't been watching your videos for a while, but I stayed subscribed because I was hoping you weren't going to go down this pipeline. I'm sad that you seem to fall into the conservative woke trap. Wokeness isn't left-wing, it's only used by conservatives to make a big deal out of small instances that don't really matter and aren't reflective of left-wing ideals. I'm sad but also glad that you posted this, so I know it's for sure time to go for me. Which, again, I agree with that. Not so much like time to go, whatever, like I already stopped watching your videos, but I definitely agree that this whole like wokeness thing is literally just conservatives taking things that aren't even left-wing and using them against people with different ideals than them.
I also have a lot of people, you know, criticizing me because I do take comedy for what it is. I think Ricky Gervais is absolutely hilarious. I do. I have watched him for years at this point. Do I agree with everything he says? No. So sometimes I don't find a joke funny and I'm like, that wasn't for me, but maybe someone else found it funny. I don't think that comedy is a reason to have a breakdown, and for a lot of people it is, and a lot of people take it very seriously. And so what those people can do is not watch that. Where I have a problem is coming in and saying, well, I don't enjoy this comedy or this TV show, so you shouldn't be watching it either. You can make a request and, you know, present your arguments and say this is why, but it's not up to you to just tell people and they have to do it. I think that is just incredible. I think that we are losing the innocence of comedy, and we are losing the fact that we can just have that distance to ourselves. There's a lot of the time where, you know, people joke about things that I went through that weren't fun, that I went through that were a little bit traumatizing, that I went through that were, you know, quite terrible things, and I can laugh at that because I know it's not a personal attack. This person isn't attacking me personally and laughing at me and what happened to me. They're just making a funny joke. Sometimes, a lot of the time, it's also dark. Dark comedy is very popular. I don't have a problem with it. And I cannot be around people who can't take the joke. And I've always been like that, to the point where I'm like, you know what, like, not in a bad way, but maybe we're just not on the same frequency. I wouldn't sit there and joke at it in an inappropriate moment, but if I choose to go to a comedy show, then I choose to go to a comedy show, and I choose to laugh at the things that make me laugh. That doesn't mean I agree with them. That doesn't mean that I have some kind of, you know, some kind of bias against the people. That doesn't mean that it's even about a certain person. Sometimes it's a concept. Sometimes the concept is so ridiculous you have to laugh. And unfortunately, that's not allowed anymore, or it's starting to get to a point where that's not allowed. We are also becoming so incredibly sensitive. And this is what I think, again, was one of the big reasons. They've been amounting to this point where classic books are being re-edited. And that's scary to me. I've talked about this. I've again had a very controversial community post where I said, "Did you read 1984 by George Orwell? And do you see any similarities?" And the reason I said that was because I was listening to it on Audible, and it was very weird because I was listening to it on Audible, and there's a chapter in which they are basically going back and re-editing articles and newspapers in order to make it whatever the narrative is at the time in that society. And then I watched a video where I believe Dr. Seuss and another children's author and Roald Dahl. So I think this is the dude that came up with Matilda. Their books are being edited, and for example, words like fat are being taken out. So in one of the books, and I think this is Willy Wonka, the word enormously fat was taken out, and the word enormous was just left in there. So no one can be described in those books as fat anymore, but they can be described as enormous. I believe the word ugly was taken out, and the word beastly was put in. The concept of editing books that were written a while ago to fit the agenda and the political climate of today is terrifying to me. Terrifying. And I can't imagine why we're erasing that part of history to make it what it is now. That's dark. To me, that is so dark.
So again, I get what you're saying there, and I actually agree. Like, I don't like editing original books. I think if you want books to be better, make better books and like new ones, but I think original ones should stay as they are, if nothing else, to learn from. But the flip side of that, for Mrs. wants to lean as far away from the left as humanly possible, a lot of the groups behind banning books in schools are conservatives. So yeah, take that for what you will, Miss Sara, but I don't think that you would like what they're doing with books either.
And I don't agree with that. And I'm not going to be on the board with people who are like, yeah, this is great, let's do that. No. If you want books to be more inclusive and amazing and all of these different, write them. Write new stuff to reflect today's society. Stop changing classic things or old stuff to fit your idea of what that should have been like. We have a lot of stuff that we need to learn from. We have books like, was it To Kill a Mockingjay or Mockingbird? I've never personally read it, but a class that my friend was in had to read it for English literature. And that is a very dark book. And that is about something that was very much a reality at the time, and it isn't now. So we need to look at these things to understand it, to learn from it. Imagine if we went back and edited it, and then made it something different. And yet, we're not totally editing them yet, but we're starting to edit them now. And that, to me, is very scary. Another thing that I'm seeing that I simply don't understand is the push for labels. I thought we were trying to get away from that. I thought our parents' parents and our parents were trying to say, hey, don't label me. I am just who I am. I love who I love. I'm this kind of person, and I'm just a person. You shouldn't care about anything else. Let's ditch the labels. We're all people. And now we're saying all cis-het white men are this. All cis-het white women are this. If you don't explicitly tell me who you're sleeping with on a regular basis, like, you need to tell me that so I know what you are. We're not looking at character anymore. We're not looking at who people are as personality-wise, what they tell us that they are. We are basing entire personalities around who we are sleeping with. Entire personalities. And I don't mean this is an important part of my life. I'm gonna, just carry that with pride. That's different. I'm talking about my entire platform is based on my mental illness. And I'm talking about influences that are literally influencing people. We've talked about this, to get functional movement disorders based on that are developing tics because they're watching TikToks of people with supposed Tourette's and are almost like developing Tourette's, and they have to be put in rehab with a ban on their phone for weeks to recover. We've talked about this in my last video. These people, again, because that needs apparently explaining, I don't mean people who are proud of that part of them, who want to raise awareness. That's different. I'm talking about people who solely focus the entire platform on just that and nothing else. There's no information. There's no, like, if you feel like you may have this, if you need help or support or community, this is where you go. It's just like, oh, watch me tick, watch me do this, watch me do that. And then people are being affected by that. Very real people are being affected by that. But let's put that aside. Let's talk about the fact that, again, we went from don't label me to now being like, you have to be labeled. What minority do you belong to? What do you identify as? Do we just not look at people's personalities anymore? Do we just not have conversations about our achievements, our hobbies, our houses, our partners, our jobs, our pets, our political views, our moral beliefs, our religions? Do we not talk about that anymore? And not talk as in interrogate people, but just have conversations about that, where we can walk away from that, not saying I made an ally or I made an enemy, but just saying that was a nice conversation, or that wasn't a great conversation, I don't agree with that person, and then go on about our lives. I don't get it. I don't get the constant push for labels and labeling other people. I don't get it. I don't understand it. For now, I think that is all of the things I wanted to talk about and touch on, and just give you a little bit of a information in the informative video. I will be carrying on with the content that I do want to do, and that is content that I find interesting and important, and I understand that it's not for everyone. I am expecting 100% my subscriber count to just plummet, and I respect that. That's absolutely fine. This is not what you signed up for when Tom Harlock first mentioned my videos.
Okay, that's pretty much the end of her video. She ends it off by just saying she's excited to make content where she doesn't have to hide what she feels and all that. One thing though is you would think, again, her being educated in psychology, she would know you can't catch Tourette's from watching a TikTok, so those people were probably just looking for attention, unfortunately. But I mean, yeah, essentially I've pretty much touched on everything within her video that I want to talk about. I think you can kind of see the main issue is that she's using very extreme examples to justify her opinion. She's saying she wants to lean more in the center, but also saying she wants to be as far away from the left as humanly possible. There were actually quite a few comments that I found when I was reading through them that I wanted to just kind of pop up here. One person said, y'all know woke was just a talking point made up by conservatives, and that there's a big difference between being a leftist and people who are actually just chronically online and under the guise of being a leftist. Either way, this isn't surprising but super disappointing. I don't know how anyone can ever stand for hate. It's very interesting to me that Sara, who's so educated and prides herself in being able to research and discern information properly, is not able to somehow find out what the rest of us seemingly already know. And here's another person who kind of said, again, the same type of thing, but someone said, while watching this video, I made a couple of comments, but I think I understand what frustrates me the most about this video. You're making points about why you're leaving the left, and they're all either far up your ass left things that only exist on TikTok, non-issues, or just twisted or not true at all. I think that's what frustrates me, the wrong idea about the left, because we're seeing too much loud screaming babies online. But you do what feels good. I just hope you don't get sucked into the right and start making up reasons why someone can't dress up as a drag queen. I'll hang around because I can handle different opinions. It's just frustrating when it's on a semi-big platform broadcasted as a truth. I hope you will keep on checking on your sources and not blindly follow along because it confirms your feelings at the moment. 100%. Someone else said, it's sad that growing up for you means regressing, but you do you. I kind of felt the same way as well. And then someone else said something which, again, I find very interesting because the whole take was very like me-centric. If it doesn't affect me, I don't need to care about it. Someone said, I've never seen a video of her. Am I missing something? Why is the woman who gets a paycheck for making a react video of 500-pound American woman coming out about this? This grown woman said she never knew about politics and still doesn't. How is it relevant to her work then? Who cares? I'm 7 minutes in and she's giving her whole life story like anyone could possibly care, or is it even relevant? Why did I actually listen thinking this would be juicy in any way? And then someone else said, she always has been very self-important. You're not missing anything except whatever time you wasted watching the video, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I agree with a lot of these comments basically saying the above, which just seems to be a general consensus, of course. A few outliers, there was a few people in support of her, but most people were just saying like, this is pretty disappointing and your takes were based on extreme views. I don't actually disagree with everything Sara said, but I just rather find it kind of funny that for such an educated person, and she prides herself on her education, yet as another commenter mentioned, it seems like she's super easily influenced by like media and what their portrayal of the left really is. And using extreme examples is just not a fair or nuanced way to discuss anything. Really, it's just not a helpful way to have a discussion. If the left truly was just the example she gave, I also wouldn't want to align myself with that, but I can kind of discern for myself that that is very extreme cases, and that's really not what the entire political side is reflective of. It's probably about 1% of the groups that she discussed, and some of what she used wasn't even like true at all. It was just inaccurate information, like the one about the trans teacher. But yeah, that's kind of everything I have to say about that. Let me know your thoughts on it down below, or if you were surprised by this, because I was like a little bit surprised to see the video of it, but given her type of content, which seemed very like Blair White-esque, I wasn't actually that surprised about it. But yeah, let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!